Good morning, everybody. Today is, Sunday, Yitestah Menachem, Toshim Pei. Now, we're learning Tanya with Hashem's help. And last week, we learned a whole lot. I learned a lot. In the beginning of Perek Yud Dalet, the whole page. We learned until 4 lines from the bottom, right? The last line. I don't want to be such a fool to deny the truth. And in the class I gave you last week, I made a point of not going into the details of this page. I just read the page and translated it, and I focused on one thought. Midas ha-beinani and midas kolodam, as opposed to madregas ha-beinani. Or to use the language of the beginning of the Tanya, and I'm a little bit tonguing and cheeking it. I don't mean it 100%, but in Higoyin, in Limud, it's a oizgehalten comparison. In Perek Aleph, the Alter Rebbe says there's Shem HaMushal and Shem HaToyer. There are words that people use in a borrowed way, and there's words that people use in a descriptive way, where the word says something, as opposed to representing something. Right? So when you call a little yingele, a little meidele, a tzaddik, or a tzaddikis, it's a Shem HaMushal. When you call a yid, that hargei b'tainis, who killed his Yetzer Hara, a tzaddik, that's Shem HaToyer. If you call a person who most of his actions are good, and less than half of his actions are not good, and you call him a tzaddik, that's called Shem HaMushal. Correct? On the other hand, you're talking about a beinani. He has a Yetzer Hara, never did an Aveira. If you describe such a person as a beinani, that's a Shem HaToyar, right? Muhus Madregas HaBeinani, which in Perek Yud Beis was called Madrega. Midas HaBeinani, compared to Madregas HaBeinani, is like Shem HaMushal versus Shem HaToyer. It's not exactly the same, because the Shem HaMushal of Perek Aleph is halacha. A beinani means half of a person's actions are sins, is a beinani, half, 50-50. 50-50. In Perek Yud Dalet, the Alter Rebbe is not talking about 50-50. He's talking about Chaleisa B'chol Shah. Define your life by 60 seconds, define your life by 1 minute, and then by another minute, and then a minute after that, and then a minute after that, and 1 more minute after that, and so forth. Veistach, the Rebbe once mentioned this, Veistach. Ha'ovar is ovar, ha'osid, ayin, v'ha'hoive, kiheref ayin. It's a blink of an eye. If you reduce your life to a series of heref ayins, you can be a beinani 1 minute at a time. It's called midas ha-beinani. And the Rebbe says, midas kol adam, v'acharei kol adam yimshech. Because even though was told to us, to all Jews, at all generations. Al Rebbe says the finish in Tanya. Right? Teira he nitzchias, teira achas v'kolana. Al Rebbe says, teira achas v'kolana means that Yikorev Elach Adav Meid v'ficha, or b'vav chalasese was said lekulana. But upon him, as a nishtazei poshit, evidently that it's not so simple. So although in Perek Yud Beis, the Alter Rebbe talked about the ideal beinani, the Shem HaToyer of beinani, madregas ha-beinani, which we have coined the capsule is Melucho Memshala. And I'm not going to tell you what they mean. Okay, we've done it so many times that But in Perek Yud Dalet, we're talking a relatively Shem HaMushal beinani. A person doesn't do any Avedas. But not because of Mahus Madregasa, not because of his Avodah Pnimius, but because he lives every minute. And he doesn't do Avedas Bepeil. He doesn't miss the opportunities to do mitzvahs Bepeil. So he's a beinani in the minute. He's a beinani in what's called Midas HaBeinani. So we read a whole page. Yeah, from the second line from the top of the page, the beginning of the page, until 4 lines from the bottom of the page.
I just want to make sure. So when we say that the Tanya teaches a person how to be a beinani, is that a statement we're talking about Madregas HaBeinani or Midas HaBeinani?
This is a question that every bocher asks his mashpia. If his mashpia is honest about how he reads the beginning of Perek Yud Dalet, I cannot remember my teachers putting me in the position where I was able to ask that question. The teretz is that the Alter Rebbe means this also. Midas ha-beinani is seif kol seif beinani, yeah? It's not madregas ha-beinani. In other words, relatively speaking, he's a beinani in Asiya, even though he's not a beinani in his mahus, in his madrega. Ich habe gelernt nach dem Rambam. Ich lerne Perek Echad Layim mit Rambam. Steht der Rambam also, als alle seine Chuy mit Talmetere, Reiche, mit Orme, mit Gesunde, mit Kranke, sie geht auf Gemorres. Die Gemara sagt, dass sie gewinnen Hillel und sie gewinnen Rabbi Elazar ben Chasma. Hillel gewinnen sehr arm. Ich hatte was essen. Rabbi Elazar ben Chasma gewinnen sehr, sehr reich. Und die Gemara sagt, Hillel mechayev es ha'aniyim, Rabbi Elazar ben Chasma mechayev es ha'ashirim. Bei Hillel kann lernen Teire, kann jeder auch nicht lernen Teire. Also, ihr seid mechayev a sehr viel Jidenes. Larich ist jammer schon Gesundheit. It's a schus. It's been a schus for the last 25 years. It still is. So we're going to go over. We're starting from the beginning of the Perek. Perek Yudalet. But my intention now, in contrast to last week, where I made it my business to continuously focus on the primary idea, which is the word midah. And we're not talking about what's going on inside, what you feel and what you're holding and what your davening is. We're talking about this 60 seconds. So now we're going to reread it, and we're going to examine the nuance. There's a lot of pratim that the Alter Rebbe says, and some of them are quite scholarly. And how much scholarship we're going to explore, we'll see. But we're going to at least touch on a number of points that are found in this page that we went over last week quite quickly, and now we're going to explore them with a little bit more attention, with a finer eye. Okay, so here we go. Perek Yudalet, from the beginning. V'hine. Midas ha-beinani and midas kol. The measure of the beinani is the measure of all people. And I suppose, the question that really should be asked, do I have to do tshuva first? One of the questions, could a person be a beinani if he has an aveda, if he hasn't done tshuva first? So in a number of places of Tanya, it says, Perek Yudzayin, you can't be a beinani unless you do tshuva for the avedas that you did in your past. But l'cha'ira, that means a beinani in madrege. A beinani in midah is b'chol shor, today, now. But it's a question. Okay? And all people should be drawn after this derech. It would be nice if it would be Greis Chassidim. It would be nice. It really would be nice. But this, anybody can do it. Shekol Adam, any person, Yochali is Beini, is free to be a Beinini b'chalei b'chal for this moment and for this hour. Why? Ki, the tenet is, Ha-Beinini einei meyes bera. Shu davar ha-masal alev. Stop. The Beinani condition on the level of midah has nothing to do with how you feel. That's how you read it. It has nothing to do with how you feel. It only has to do with how you act. Tzadikim is ava v'yireh. Madreges ha-Beinani is melucha memsholah. That means during davening he has to feel. Midas ha-Beinani is any masal alev. Nobody is concerning themselves. The Eibishtik HaYochel is not concerning himself with your heart. The only measure, the only issue that's of significance is action, right? To be a Beinani, you do not need to be disgusted by evil. Which is given over to the heart, which is Madregas Tzadik. Now, pause, parenthesis. In Perek Yud Beis we said that Madregas HaBeinani is on this level during davening. When he davens, he's like a tzaddik. But we're not talking Madregas HaBeinani. We're talking Midas HaBeinani. And Midas HaBeinani doesn't have to have that at all. That's l'chayr davart. V'lei kol itim Shabbos. Like Shabbos in American is you're not always in the mood. Like kol itim Shabbos. Not all times are the same. Right, so Pnimis and Yodim and Apikabola Savek Ayid the Porteg. I don't know exactly when he passed away. Zayim Menachem. His name was Yisrael Yosef Zalmanov. They had him at Kfar Chabad. He was a Shmuel Zalmanov's Azun. I don't remember Shmuel Zalmanov. Shmuel Zalmanov left America before I was born. But my father would talk to me, even as a child. When he would talk about the Shmuel Zalmanov, it was like an immortal. The Shmuel Zalmanov apparently was Matsuyan. He was a very special person. And he had one son, Yossi, Yisrael, Yosef. Zal was very close to the Rebbe. I don't know his whole life history. I was in the mikvah, I met Araychik. Shmuel David Araychik was much younger than Shmuel Zalmanov. And Shmuel David Araychik was Shmuel Zalmanov's uncle. You hear what I'm telling you? Rabbi Reichik was Shmuel Zalmanov's uncle, and he got married 13 or 14 years after him. No, 20 years after. How does it happen? He was married a few times, between his oldest child and his younger child was 36 years. So Rebbe Sineraichik, Allah Shalom, the Rebbe used to tell Label, every time he said Mrs., the Rebbe would say Rebbetzin, was the youngest daughter from the patriarch. Reb Shmuel Zamenhof was an Edim of one of the older brothers, verstehst? So Shmuel Zamenhof made Rabbi Reichik Shidduch, and Rabbi Reichik was his uncle. So I met Lothar Reichik to figure out the generations. It's an entanglement. It's a special job to work it all out. I met him in the mikvah. I saw about your cousin. I don't know what you want to call him. An uncle, a cousin, a second cousin. His father was his cousin. He had a very special. He was a Metzuyin de Kerid. He had a special relationship with the Rabbeim. But I didn't know much about him. I asked around because Shmuel Zamenhof was something very special. But there's one thing which is bepirsum, and I'm mentioning it because you're not going to hear this from anybody else. Nobody else is crazy. Nobody even notices these things. And I'm mentioning it as chusei le'ilin nishmasei. They printed a sefer 25 years ago, more, that's called Yemei Bereishis. It came out before Gimel Tammuz. Yemei Bereishis is a volume on the period leading up to the Frierdiker Rebbe's Petira, Histalkus, through that year until Yud Shvat, the following year, when Rebbe's Makabel Dinasiyas, and then it goes a little bit further. It was made by Yossi Greenberg. He's a shliach in Alaska. It's a really well-researched book. He put in hundreds of hours, probably thousands of hours. It's it's a good sefer. The chkire was done correctly. It wasn't just, I heard a story. He went back to the sources and he found newspaper articles. It's very, very well done. In this sefer, there's a ksav yad from this Yisrael Yosef Zalmanov of a yechidus that he had by the Rebbe, I think in Cheshvan Tafshin Yud Aleph. It's printed in the sefer. I don't know how he got his hands on it, and I think they later printed it in Teres Menachem. I'm not even sure. But who would? It's a yechidus from before the Rebbe was officially Rebbe even. You understand? Then I came across it. I read it. So I didn't skip it. I wasn't bored by it. I was doing. And I'm sharing it with you. I'm really sharing it with you. Well, Ayid is avek. Davon the mannen. Es ist a gute Sach at the Mund. But the word is negia a little bit here. He asked the Rebbe. He was before Bar Mitzvah. He was before Bar Mitzvah. He was around Bar Mitzvah. He was born Tafresh Tzadik Tes. This is Yud Aleph. He was 12. Tzadik Tes till Yud Aleph is 12, right? Am I correct? He asked the Rebbe, how come in his Avedis Hashem there's moods? Moods. Amol daven sich besser, amol daven sich nicht so geschmack. Sometimes he davens better, sometimes it's so good. Now, if you ask me that question, I would say, you know why? It's called Yetzer Hara. Push it to press. The Rebbe told him, Bazeh Aloshen, you can see it inside. Weil lemeile seine do shinuyim, bemeile seine do lamata shinuyim. The Rebbe gave him, the Rebbe was speaking to him, and I put him, the Rebbe knew mit Remen Hatzatanam, and the Rebbe doesn't, that the Rebbe's a maven doesn't need our mavinus. He was a 12-year-old boy. The Rebbe says to him, L'mayla de Shinoim. In other words, the Eibishter's relationship with us, mitzad deserusa de liyela. So the Eibishter alone has Shinoim. And since L'mayla Shinoim is in other words, sometimes why one day you daven better and one day you daven worse is not because of how much you slept, and not because of how much you ate, and not because of how much you were machavin, not because of other things that may have come into play. Push it because the connection between you and the Eibishter fluctuates. Milmayla. You know, we're coming now, it's already Baruch Hashem, 10 days since Tisha B'Av. The 9 days, yeah, today's Yud Tes, yeah, today is Yud Tes, huh?
Yud Tes.
Today's Yud Tes. So we're getting further and further away. Al Pi Kabbalah, and I'm sure by big tzaddikim they're margishit, in the 9 days, in the 3 weeks, there's Avelos Lamaylo.
It feels terrible.
So I hate it. Yeah, but I don't feel the ruchnias. I just feel, I don't know what I feel.
We're affected.
The tzaddikim feel silach hamoichin pushit. The tzaddik separates from us not because he can learn another plat gemara, because there's a ruach hakedesh shade olav. And by Yankov Avinu it says, and by Moshe Rabbeinu it says that in the times of Avelos, the ruach hakedesh went away, and when the Avelos passed and the Simcha returned, vayidaber ad Hashem elai leimeir, says Rashi, Pasku Meisei Midbar, the Meisei Midbar died, and the Eibush was miyachet Shmei Olav. Until then, Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu, vayomer, and not vayidaber. Moshe Rabbeinu felt for 38 years the fact that Yidden were being punished. He felt it in his Ruach HaKodesh. And by Yankov Avinu, from time Yosef HaTzadik disappeared, until they told him the words, Oy Yosef Chai, Vatchi Ruach Yankov Avinu, Zokt Rashi, Shor Salav Ruach HaKodesh. So by Tzadikim, this is a real thing. And the Rebbe told to a 12-year-old, In other words, the Rebbe felt, the Rebbe knew that this boy halt ba'azazach. It's a very interesting thing. That sometimes you say, why today it's nicht gedaven wie Nechten, das to wissen, das mit Nebishn. It's not about you, it's about the Eibishter. So the Rebbe says, Loi kol itim shavis. But to Midas HaBeinani has nothing to do. See, that's the word. If you're talking about Davar HaMosal Alev, Loi kol itim shavis, the hours are not the same. And when you say hours are not the same, when you're talking about emotions, it's not only how you feel. It's called Eis Ratzon, right? V'nisa v'ilasi. Every morning when we daven, we say V'nisa v'ilasi l'cha Hashem Eis Ratzon. And when we daven Mincha, we don't say l'cha Hashem Eis Ratzon, because it's not an Eis Ratzon. It's an Eis of Shikras, like it says, except Shabbos. That's why Shabbos, after you finish Kaddish, before we even say you say V'nisa Eis Ratzon. So Loi kol itim Shabbos says the Alter Rebbe, but Loi kol itim Shabbos has to do with Davar HaMasal Alev. You're talking about emotions, talking about Avayir, you're talking about spiritual connectedness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. L'mayla is Doshinuyim. U'b'meila is Lamata is Doshinuyim. Says the Rebbe, but when you're talking about Midas HaBeinani, there's no Davar HaMasal Alev. Madrigas HaBeinani does have Davar HaMasal Alev, like we learned in Perikut Beis, Zmanei Tefillah, Itei Tefillah, Melech, Melucha Memshala, but Midas HaBeinani is not about that, it's just about Avaita. The Midas HaBeinani is defined strictly and entirely and absolutely by staying away from evil and doing good. And the Alter Rebbe teaches the Hainu bepoil mamish. It means only action, only what one does actionably. B'maisen an action, dibur in a speech, umachshav in a thought. Says the Rebbe, since Midas HaBeinani is not at all about Davar HaMasal Alev, as opposed to Tzaddik, and even about Madregas HaBeinani. So therefore it's Midas Kol Adam. Why? It's right now. It's this minute. Shebehem, when it comes to Maisa, Diur, and Machshava, HaBechira, HaYecheles, HaReshus. 3 expressions. The choice and the freedom. The Reshus means permission. Right? The Reshus means possibility. I'm going to translate Yecheles as possibility and Reshus as freedom. The Rambam uses the Lashon. When the Rambam has 2 parakim in Hilchas Tshuva, where he talks about free will. And the Rambam begins that Perek with the words Reshus l'chol adam nesuna. And throughout the Perek, he uses the word Reshus. I'm looking in a footnote over here. I'm not a god. The Rambam's word for freedom is Reshus. It's been allowed. You're free to do as you wish. Yecheles means possibility. Possibility. You can't, the Rebbe said once, man can springen von Dach, springen auf von Dach kann man nicht. Yecheles means a possibility. And of course, Bechira means that the choice is really free. Whatever really free means, we're not going to go into. But the bottom line is, since Midas HaBeinani is not about Davar HaMasal Alev at all, it's not about emotions. It's just about Machshava Div Ma'aseh Bepeil Mamish. Says the Rebbe, any moment we're a balabayis over that. Shobehem, when it comes to actionable Machshava Div Ma'aseh Habachira, I'm going to say the freedom, the true freedom. Yecheles means possibility, and the Reshus I'm translating is freedom. Nesuna l'chol adam is given to each person. Laseis u'ledaber v'lachshav, to do, to speak, and to think. Even if it's against the desires of the heart and the exact opposite of what the heart desires, a person does not have to act on his feelings. Or to say it in Yiddish, we're not animals. We could feel one way and do another. We have that possibility. Animals don't. And it's not easy for some people, by the way, but it's possible. Okay, let's keep reading. The Rebbe is going to speak about Ava Misuteres in this Perek. The tool that allows a person to exercise his freedom, even if his midas are in a different direction, is Ava Misuteres. I don't want to get ahead of myself. So the answer to your question is, there is but it's not that the feeling is overcome by a different feeling. A person is free to not do what his feelings push, and he can do the opposite. And therefore, without dealing with that feeling, he has Bechira and Yecheles and Reshus. No one said it's easy. his bechira and yechelos and his shus in this minute, in these 60 seconds, to be in the madrega mitzvah. I remember I was in yeshiva, and we had a guest speaker. I'm not going to tell you the name. It's not a big deal, but and he told the Bachar about Maise. It wasn't a regular yeshiva. It was a rebellious yeshiva. And the Bachar was so taken by it that the Gemara, that says in Shiltis, there was a Yid who was very, very rich. And he was a lowlife. And he had a desire to do a certain Aveda. And it was so strong that he was Poshet Chayla Saba. He was physically in bed. He was sick. That's how big a Baal Taiva he was. I'm not telling you all the details of the story. The Nukuda is the Taiva came to him. Ina the other. He could have done anything he wanted. So somebody said to him, hey, look at you. You're shaku and Taivas. You're no tzaddik. You have a moment now, like the Gemara says about the Rebbe Loza ben Durdaya, yesh keine lome b'shoa achas. If you can do anything you want. If you will control yourself and not do this Aveda, what you will achieve in this moment. And he didn't do the Aveda, and in an instant he was not sick anymore. He took a walk. So the Chazal say that Rabbi Akiva saw him. And Akiva saw on top of his head a fire. And that's why he was called Nosan Tzutzisa. Because it was a nitzas, there was a fire of David. Mamish a low life. A Baltaiva, a Grabjung, a Gvi, Alabailis. And in one instant, in other words, a person doesn't have to act on their emotions necessarily. I remember the Bacham's reaction. They were debating if the story is true, if it could have happened. But this Amaisa Shaitan Sfarim and Shaitan Chazal. It's not Sfarim, Shaitan Chazal. They didn't Chiltas. Weiter. Okay. Kigam b'shosh halev chaymed u'mesavi. Even when the heart desires and lusts. And I always tell you this. The meaning of the word taiva that I think serves the purpose the best is weakness. Taivas weaken a person, like you're buckling at the knees. You don't have koyach to resist. And of course, the worst condition of weakness is a mingitzach noch. If a person is accustomed to letting themselves have what they shouldn't have, so each time they give in, the time later they have less self-control. That's the taich. Avenesecha mavdilim, the avedes melafafte, and all these other expressions. It takes over the person. Nevertheless, the heart is desiring and weakened by a physical weakness. Whether it's a permitted taiva, God forbid it's a prohibited taiva, says that Rebbe Yochel is Gaber. You could be stronger than it. And we're not talking about being stronger than the emotion. We're simply talking about controlling the mice of a pair. And it happens every day. It happens every day. I'm the mikvah yesterday. A boy, I have no idea who he is. Says me, can you watch movies and be a Hasidic Bacher? I asked him his name, because I don't like to talk to strangers. He told me his name. So what am I supposed to tell him? What am I supposed to tell him? No. So what did I accomplish? Yeah. What did I accomplish? I said, listen, movies are a bad thing. You can't kasher them. If you know that they're bad and you don't want to watch them, and sometimes you give in, you're a Hasidic Shabbat. But if you're going to make the movie kosher, you're not a Hasidic Shabbat. So he thinks. So I say to him, the way you should look at your life is that every day you didn't watch a movie is a victory. And he lit up. He was so happy to hear that. Don't look at yourself how much of a failure. Look at it the other way around. Every time I don't do the thing that I'm not supposed to do, I'm a beinani. That's what it is, right? Every time I don't give in to a taiva, I'm a beinani. Huh? Yochel his gabed, a person can be stronger. Ulasiach daite mimena lagamri, to totally distract his mind from it altogether. Not the emotion, but the maise. He makes a push to cheshbon. This is an aveda. An aveda tar menishton. That's all. An aveda tar menishton. Dvarim hamutarim is ein zach. An aveda tar menishton. A person says to his heart, Eineni reitz eliyas rosh. I don't want to be a Rasha, I feel a Shah Achaz even for one moment, even though Chabagrisi Yetzer Hara, and I'm sure the Eibishter understands, and Taivas I have, but the Aveda I don't want to do, the action I don't want to do, I do not want to be separated and cut off from the Eibishter, b'shum eifin in any way, for the instant that I'm doing the Aveda. Tidiksiv, as the Pasuk says, Aveinei seichem, mavdilim, v'goymer. Avedas are a wall between me and the Eibishter. He says, I don't want to be a Rasha. I don't want to be cut off. Later on the page, you can have what Emmanuel Shachat calls cardiac Judaism. I'm a Jew at heart. And he used to say, if you put the whole Judaism in the heart, you can have a heart attack. It's too much pressure. You have to spread it out in the whole goof. This is his line. The person says, identity aduse. It's not so terrible. This person makes I don't want to be a Russian. I don't want to sin. Paltiel, because I don't want to become caught off for the Eibishter for one instant. Now let's talk about this. Okay? So I want to share with you a few ideas. There's a very interesting word from the Malten Rebbe. It's not in the Sichos, as far as I know. But from Chassidim it's brought. And it says in Akdam of Teire Shalom, the Rebbe writes, that when you understand the Ibegegebenkeit, the dedication of Chassidim to their Rabbeim, you understand that what Chassidim say, Chazer Avot, or write Hanocha Vasicha, it's probably reliable, even though Shagiyas Miyav and they're only people. But Kavanos Samretzuya, they so much wanted to be Mechaven to what the Rebbe wants, that it's Korev Lavadai that what they're saying is true and how they're repeating it is true. But this is the story. We all know that Alter Rebbe was in jail. Alter Rebbe was in jail. It's very, very famous that he was asked 23 questions. Chav Gimel Shailas. And it's unbelievably exciting to see. You can open the Alter Rebbe's Igros Kodesh, the new ones, it's all reprinted and organized in a Seder Mesudah, and you can see the 23 kashas that were written, and the 23 terutzim, Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Til Chav Gimel. Exactly what we were always told in Teresh Balpeh. They found the original Tzav Yad Kodesh of the Alter Rebbe in a Russian archive. And they were fasim it. The Kisvei Yad are in Russia, but the copies we have. Came out, Rabbi Shua Munch, and put them in Kerem Chabad. And now it's Mimepirsu. It's Igros Kodesh, they printed Igros Kodesh. But it's also Yodua that the 23 shilas were prepared, they were written. And the Alter Rebbe answered them b'ksav. There was also a lot of anecdotal. Shmuas, they talked. And this is the Teresh of Alpeh. In other words, this is not written down. So that's why it becomes a shaila. How reliable is it? It's not in the documents now. You can see the documents. And you can see the similarities to the version of the story that we had always. And you could also see the small mistakes that developed over the years. You're reading the original documents, read Alter Rebbe's own words. And you could see how people, over the generations, distorted a little bit what the Alter Rebbe was saying, as he said it in Tovkuf Nun Tes and Tovkuf Ein Samachalf. But anyway, so one of the anecdotes that they tell is that in addition to the 23 written shilas, there were kama v'kama shilas balpeh. And one of them was this, Ubagdoma. You must understand, Alter Rebbe was arrested twice. The first time he was arrested by the Russian government based on a mesida of a person whose name was Hirsch ben Baruch. Ada Yemazeh, we have no idea who he is, Hirsch ben Baruch. They took the Alter Rebbe in just in case. It's not in America, innocent till proven guilty. In Russia, it's guilty till proven innocent. The government asked the questions. So as the Friedrich Rebbe describes it, it looked worse. But it wasn't, the arrest looked very bad. The way it looked Bechitzonius was much worse. But the second arrest was much more dangerous. They invited him, they gave him a hotel. He didn't stay in a prison the second time he was in Tanya Soviet. He had a suite. But the Misnagdim haben zugestellt the Shailes. And it was sakonis. I mean, a word like this and a word like this, you know, Veshtet Chazal. A nekuda, you take away a nekuda, echad becomes acher. You add a nekuda, acher becomes echad. And it's beinei emos machriva and mamish. It was such a sensitive, the question, the Misnagdim's goal was Rahman al-Islam to push Chassidim out of Klal Yisrael. That the government of Russia should officially announce that by law they're a different faith. Rahman al-Islam, hoyoloi sihi. And the Alter Rebbe, of course, did not want that to happen. And the Alter Rebbe was Meisei Nefesh to make sure that this wouldn't happen. And that's the Padar B'Shalom Avsheinu, Veistach. But anyway, so the Savigdir, in the document is called Chaimovich, Ben Chaim. The Alter Rebbe is called Baruchovich, Ben Baruch. They're calling them by the last names. The second arrest, we don't have the ksav. The second arrest, we have the Russia. The first arrest, we have the original ksav Yad Kodesh of the Alter Rebbe. Mamish Kipshute. The second arrest, they have a Russian translation of the questions and the Russian translation of the answers. And we, of course, we know the famous story that they sent them to Vilnius to be Meturgim. The originals are not in that file. So they're calling them as they're written in the documents. The Alter Rebbe is called Baruchovich, Ben Baruch in Hebrew. And the Avigdor is called Ben Chayimovich. So one of the informal questions, which are not in that document, that Chayimovich asked Baruchovich, was that Yadua, that when the Baal Shem Tov would daven, he would say Af, Aleph Pei, Af. And the Misnagdim were tining that the Baal Shem Tov was a dark man, had a shaykhis, as they say in the Shmusim mit Kinder und Jugend, or the Cheres from Lubavitcher Rebbe, mit nit gute. This is my childhood, mit nit gute. What's nit gute? It means shadim, dark, the dark side. And that he would say Af to invoke anger, hate, violence. That the Baal Shem Tov was associated with koiches of darkness and evil. So the answer, it was known, when I wasn't around times of the Baal Shem Tov, but it was known the Baal Shem Tov in Daven for Af. And they said to the Alter Rebbe that it's because the Baal Shem Tov was me'edir, not just dinim, but charei, anger, evil, schlechts. So the Alter Rebbe said like this: I could have lied. All I had to do was say that it was an idiosyncrasy. Everybody has mishigasan, you know. One guy does like this, another guy does like this. Everybody, you know, everybody has mishigasan, yeah. So the Kvayochel, like we can't say, the Baal Shem Tov had an idiosyncrasy. Everybody has their, you know. Rabbi Shmuel was looking, chidem. That was his thing. So the Baal Shem Tov, but the Alter Rebbe said that would have been a lie. Alter Rebbe said that it would have been a lie. If I had said that lie, that would have meant that for ein Rege bin ich gewinn abgerissen von Baal Shem Tov. Alter Rebbe said, for the amount of time it would have taken him to get those words out. And why is he saying those words? He's saying those words to defend Teras Shalom Baal Shem Tov, and Avidos Shalom Baal Shem Tov, and Chayev Shalom Baal Shem Tov, and the Messiah of the Baal Shem Tov. But the Alter Rebbe said for the few seconds that he was saying those words about the Baal Shem Tov, which were not true, he would have been separate from the Baal Shem Tov. And the Alter Rebbe said, Ich hab sich nicht gewollt abreißen von Baal Shem Tov a viele für ein Rege. I didn't want to be disconnected with him for one instant. Hab es sich meise nefesh gewesen. Und ich gegeben zu verstehen a Goy. Alter Rebbe said, I had Mesidas nefesh to explain to a Goy an inyan pnimi why the Baal Shem Tov said Af. And it says in some places also the Kavanah. Now, the story is famous. The Pshat is less famous. So, did the Pshat taka happen also? I'm telling you what I have read. The first part of the story is written in many places. What I'm about to say is not written in as many places. And so someone decided that this is mistama what he said, you understand? That the Baal Shem Tov was in the middle of davening. When in davening, Torah is mafsik sein. No interrupt. And the Baal Shem Tov was mechaben in his tefillah. Koif means a monkey. You have in Chazal, koif b'bnei adam. The difference, the disparity between a human being doing an act and a monkey doing an act. And the Baal Shem Tov was saying this in davening as a linguist chus. That Yidden today, compared to Yidden in earlier generations, are koif b'bnei adam. Relatively speaking, like monkeys. So maybe you should judge us with that kind of kindness and favoritism and gentleness. Of him, he's not allowed to say koif, but take his octave. So this is the story, and this is the hezber. The story I think is true. The hezber is Hashem hezber. Efshes is emes. But what's negayat to us is the story. That the Alter Rebbe said, for me to have lied, to protect Darkei Shalom Baal Shem Tov, to protect Darkei, would have meant that for ein rega I would have been cut off from Baal Shem Tov. I wasn't going to do that. So I had Mesidas Nefesh, the Rebbe said, and I explained to a Goy, an inyan pnimi. This is what this Beinani says. It's very simple. I don't want to be a Rasha. What is a Rasha? Cut off from Hashem for a rega. That's it, for a rega. Kumeisha Kasuv, Avenisechem, Kidiksiv, and it says in the Pasuk, Avenisechem, Avdilim, V'goyim. Now, this I did tell you last week, but I'm repeating it again. You have to understand. Avenisechem avdilim benechem and kechem is a pasuk in Chumash. Teresh B'Ksav, Mikra. In Tanya, this pasuk is quoted probably without a guzma half a dozen times or more. It's Kama it's Perikit. You better Chesn Yutes and Chavov. It's in a few places in Tanya, this expression of Enesechem Avdila B'nechem Ben Alekechem. But it doesn't always mean the same thing. B'chlal, when they quote Avenesechem Avdila B'nechem Ben Alekechem, they mean an emotion. They mean a regesh. What do they mean? That a human being has a certain sensitivity. A certain needs a chush. A ruch needs a chush. And because of the sensitivity, and because of the ruch needs a chush, a yid cannot do an avera. In Tanya Peidiches it says that a yid's yetzer hara is a shade, mishade in Yehudayin. It's a Jewish demon. The first line of Peidiches. And he says, Taivas heter, permitted, give me 2. Taivas Isser, it's against the Teva of a Yid. That the Rebbe Rashab and Kuntus Ramayin as a Pashtakasha. If it's against the Teva of a Nefesh of a Hamas of a Yid to do an Aveda, how come Yid can do Avedas? And he brings the Chazal, Ayei Memele Azekach, it's a Bisalach. A Yid's Yetzer Hora can't do an Aveda. But if you did an Aveda yesterday, and you haven't done tshuva for that Aveda yet, Aveda Sechem Avdilim. That's how it's normally understood, that yesterday's Aveda, last week's Aveda, last year's Aveda, last decade's Aveda, and I guess by some people, last lifetime's Aveda is a Havdalah between me, my own Lakus, and if I want to regain my chush, my relationship with the Eibishter, I have to do tshuva. So normally, Aveda Sechem Avdilim is a spiritual thing. It's a person who has a bad habit can't just stay, I'm not doing it anymore. He has to purge himself of the bad habit. That's Aveda Sechem Avdilim. I have a bad habit. In this inyan I'm weak. If I am going to conquer that bad habit, I'm going to have to do tshuva. That's what Aveda Sechem Avdilim is, a regesh. It's an emotional. Here it's pushed to the practical thing. Aveda Sechem Avdilim, I do Aveda, this second I'm separated. That's it. So the words are the same, but the taich is different. Over here we're talking about Midas HaBeinin and Midas Chaladov, and Alter Rebbe says, I want you to know, there's no emotion here. We're not talking about emotion, we're not talking about feelings, we're not talking about the minute before, we're not talking about the minute after, we're talking about now, and here, and today, in this minute. Midas HaBeinin, Midas Chaladov, V'charei HaKol, Odom Yimshech, Shabbat B'Bchirosei, U'B'Yecholtei, U'B'Reshusei, they should do what the Eibishter wants, and Ma'aseh Dibur Machshav. Why would he care? I don't want to be a Russia. What's the taich of Russia? Separate from the Eibishter. For a minute. The minute next, I'm good. Because Aveda Sechem Avdilim. Pirush. Aveda Sechem Avdilim doesn't mean the emotional and the spiritual effect, the lasting effect of the Aveda, which in Lashon HaKabbalah is the Pagam B'Nefesh, which you have to correct. It Poshet means the Rega. Over here, the taich of Aveda Sechem Avdilim means for this second that I'm doing against the Ratzon Elyon, I'm cut off from the Eibishter, like the Alter Rebbe said about him in the Baal Shem Tov. That's a taich. So what I'm doing is I'm interpreting the words of the Tanya. I'm reading the same thing I read last week. But I'm pointing out little details that last week I didn't do because I wanted to give you a bigger picture. Okay? Rak, not but then, rather, I'm continuing to read. Ani roitze l'dofka boy. I want to be attached to the Eibishter. In nafshi, ruchi v'nishmasi, my nefesh, ruch and neshama. And of course, I don't know exactly how you explain. But Yid is holding, quote unquote, sach haka. In Midas HaBeinin, how we did in Bakasha, his nefesh, ruach, and neshama, because he's not a spiritual person, he's a maisa person, an action person. Be'eslapshon, as it relates to Shleisha Levushim Yizbarach. We're not talking about Avas Hashem, we're not talking about Yiras Hashem, we're not talking about Yediyas Hashem, we're not talking about Achtas Hashem. We're talking about Be'ficha, B'vavcha, La'aseisa, Shehem. Maisa, Dibur, U'machshava. I can do what the Eibishter says. I can stop myself from doing what Hashem says not to do. I can speak what Hashem says to speak, and I cannot speak what Hashem says I should not speak. I could think what Hashem says to think, and I could not think what Hashem doesn't think. That's all. That's it. That's the whole inyan of Midas HaBeinin. He is defining himself by Machshava Dibur Amaisa. There is no Davar Amos Alev whatsoever. That's what we're learning. Okay? Now today's class is really learning. Last week was, I'm trying to teach you the Pshat and the Tanya, Limud. Yeah? I'm going to stop right here. Okay? I'm going to finish before 12 o'clock. Tanya usually takes an hour. This is 40 minutes. I'm going to stop. We're going to do better. I'm doing today a Maimed. It's worth sticking around for. Yeah, I didn't finish Friday, but it's not that difficult. It's worth sticking around for. And in Mitzvah Hashem next week, we're going to continue from right here. Okay?
I do have a question.
Go ahead.
When we learned about the Buddhas,
Perik Yud, Perik Ches.
Tivus,
Heter, right.
not just in a favor.
No, Tivus Heter you can indulge.
No, but that weakens you so that you could get.
Right. That's what says in Kuntus Mayan. The Rebbe Rashab, there's a Kuntus Mayan, which is about shtusim. It's about one word. Shtusim. The whole percentage. It's very interesting. Kuntres. Touch from an academic perspective, it revolves around the word shtus. What's mean shtus? Lamata menasech. So if a person could have a more meaningful life, and he chooses a less meaningful life, forget about right and wrong. It's shtus, not a sh. So the first shtus is taivus. The kuntres goes through a series of taivus. There's the shtus of taivus, there's shtus of shalayat and other machzik table atzmei. The whole kuntres is different shtusim. So in the beginning he's talking about the shtus of taivus, and he asks the question, what I told you is from kuntres of Mayan, Maimer Beis, Peirik Aleph. I did it today by Havlah, that the Rebbe Rashab asks, if it says in Tanya that a Yid does a Shed B'Shed in Yudoin, how does he do an Aveira? So it doesn't say in Tanya, but it says in kuntres of Mayan, that it starts from taivus heter. Because taivus heter, a Yid could be Eiler. It's consistent with Shed Mishade Yehudayin. You have to understand the word teva. You have to understand the word teva. Right. To lose your chush. Right. You have to understand again, you have to understand the word teva. Teva, in Chassidus, the word teva is used in two ways. In Peirik Yotes and Tanya, teva is used from a Sidus Nefesh, called Dova, Sheni Bechinas Tam, but that's called teva. But that's the unusual. The usual definition of the word teva is a containment, is a personality. My nature. It's not refined. It's certainly not worked over. It's the way God made me. A Yid's teva is an averi can't do. And the Rebbe says in Basalagani Tashin Gimel that a goy's teva is that he cannot be even the Sheva Mitzvahs b'nei nech. A goy l'cheira comes from a sholosh klibas atmeis legamri. It's hard to understand if a goy comes to sholosh klibas atmeis legamri. How do you expect him to be Mekayim Sheva Mitzvahs? The klipa alein. But the Rebbe says in that Maimed that it's just like it's heipach the teva of a Yid to do an Aveda and Tayag Mitzvahs. It's heipach the teva of a goy to be Eva Sheva Mitzvahs b'neneach. So someone asked the Rebbe, then how does a goy do it? And the Rebbe said, just like a Yid. Ruach shtus. It's so interesting.